Hello, my name's Dan Schkade. I'm a comic book writer and artist, and I'm looking a little rough right now because the water is currently out in my house, but I'm still very excited to talk to you guys today about story and how to put together a story very quickly out of any ingredients, because there's really three main ingredients to a story. I like to think of story the way you think of language. It's a method of communication. There's nouns and verbs, and the nouns of a story are pretty basic. And we're going to look at them right now. So when it comes to story, there's three main things. There's the protagonist who drives the action and whose goals and motivations sort of are the backbone of the story. There's the antagonist who has goals that are counter to the protagonist and usually stands in the way of the protagonist and the protagonist's goal. And there's the setting, which is the milieu that the story takes place in and usually informs the characters of the protagonist and the antagonist and what their goals are. For instance, if we're on a space station, the goal might be to keep the space station from being sabotaged or whatnot. And if they're in the Old West, the goal could be to protect a mine that's being taken over by a hostile mining company. Now, what's important to remember is that the protagonist is usually the good guy and the antagonist is usually the bad guy, but that's not always the case. Really, all that matters is that the protagonist is the main figure who moves the story forward. And anybody can move the story forward if they're motivated enough. So to help demonstrate this, I thought it would be fun to pick a protagonist, an antagonist, and a setting at random and quickly put together some rough character designs and some story beats to show you how you can just slap these things together. So what I did was I went on Twitter and I asked my followers to give me three elements each. I asked them to give me an A character, a B character, and a setting. So I wrote them down and I put them in this hat. So I'm going to shake them up a little bit, and we're going to start by picking a protagonist, which will be a pink Post-it. So let me just dig around in here. Okay. Our protagonist is a fancy vampire. So we're going to take that and stick it up here. And then right behind a light. You know what? It's fine. So next we're going to pick an antagonist, which is going to be in blue. It's tough because I got to know if it's blue or not, but I can't look at it. Okay. Our antagonist is an elderly ninja. So we can stick that right there. Lastly, the setting. This is exciting because what kind of vampire and ninja this is, what they're doing, what their motivations are, it can change completely depending on what the setting is. So let's pick this one. The North Pole. Let's stick that right there. So these are the building blocks of our story. We've got a fancy vampire, an elderly ninja, and they're in the North Pole. So what do we do with that? Well, right away what I'm thinking when I see these characters and I see the setting is these are very like toyetic figures, meaning that they're figures that would suit themselves well to being toys. It's making me think of Toy Story, actually, which is a fancy spaceman and an elderly, like an old style cowboy being in conflict with each other. So right away, I'm thinking that the vampire and the ninja are toys in the North Pole in Santa's workshop, and they've got some kind of conflict. So what I'm going to do is switch over to my Clip Studio file, and we're going to work up some quick character designs for our elderly ninja and our vampire. So right away, we've got a powerful figure in the vampire and a sort of diminutive figure in the ninja. So let's start with the vampire. He's fancy, which makes me think that he has, like, he's a newfangled kind of toy, a toy with a lot of add-ons and features and whatnot. He's probably, like, maybe he's a little bit anime. Maybe he's got this long hair. He's got an outfit with, you know, lots of flourishes and serifs. Maybe he's got like a big sort of medallion there that hangs down. And it's important to remember that he is a toy. So you got to add in points of articulation. He's got those hands that you can swap out when you buy a fancy figurine. He's got a little stand that he stands on. When you're designing a character, you can't overthink the design too much. You kind of just got to slap something down and trust that you'll be able to modify it as you go. Especially if you're working digitally like I am, nothing is really permanent. You just strike out with the best of intentions and refine as you go. So here's our tall vampire. To give him a nice distinctive profile, I want to give him a weapon. And the weapon I'm going to give him is a mace. Now, the reason that I'm doing this is that he's going to go up against an elderly ninja, and the elderly ninja is going to have a sword of some kind. So I'm giving him a mace because it has a very different silhouette from the sword. It's a bludgeoning weapon. It's big, it's heavy, it's slower. And I think that it gives the vampire a sense of weight. So now that I'm thinking that the vampire has that sense of weight, I'm going to give him a cape that slows, like it adds some mass to him. It gives him a wider profile. It's going to make him seem a little bit more imposing. So I think that's a pretty good start for our vampire. The cape is kind of plasticky. He's got articulated joints. And then real quick, what we're going to do is, well, actually, let's move on to our ninja. So this is our antagonist. So he's got to be able to attack our protagonist's weaknesses. That's what makes a good antagonist. They frustrate the protagonist. They make their strengths into weaknesses. So what I think would be kind of cool is if our elderly ninja is a bit of a diminutive figure. He's kind of hunched over. Maybe he is even leaning a little bit on his sword. His sword is in its sheath and it sort of rests on the ground. Now, since he's a toy, it wouldn't really make sense for him to be an old man ninja. I prefer the idea that he, you know, was a new ninja at one point, but he's been sort of worn down by years. You know, maybe he's a toy that was made in the North Pole and he was never sent to anybody. He's just one of the toys that never got sent out. So, you know, maybe he's defective. Maybe that's why he was never sent out. What if for whatever reason his leg didn't quite get finished? Maybe the plastic got a little warped, so he's got a bit of a bum leg. So that's what we're giving him here. We're giving him a little bit of a misshapen leg. Now, just because your leg comes out different doesn't mean it's misshapen. If we're talking about actual humans, like there's no wrong body shapes. Since he's a toy though, and he's supposed to meet a certain mold, having him be an imperfect version of that is a good reason for him to A, be an old toy that was never used, and B, have a sense of aggrievement. He's got a beef that motivates his character. So to emphasize that this leg is a bit is not the shape it's supposed to be, I'm going to give him sort of a distinctively shaped wrapped boot, and we're going to give him pleated ninja toes to show, like, because his left foot here is more distinctive, it helps draw the attention to the fact that his right foot is kind of mangled. So he leans on his sword. He's an older kind of toy, so we're going to give him, he's going to have a simpler design, kind of like a G.I. Joe figure. He's going to have more obvious joints. And he's going to have some cracks and sort of scuffs and abrasions in his plastic. And then just to give him a little more character, let's give him a big scuff right through one of his eyes. So here we have our protagonist, this fancy vampire, this prestige figure, this sort of beautiful, well, I know that my sketch is pretty rough, but the idea is that he's a beautiful, like a $100 figure for collectors only. And our ninja is a cheap toy that never got the love it deserved. So what is their story? Like I say, when I first put these characters together, I immediately thought of Toy Story. I thought about the new figure and the old figure. But let's go a little bit deeper with it. What is a story that would put these two at odds? So what I think might be interesting, and I'm going to just be sort of inking these figures as we go, because I find that as you sort of make decisions on what your characters look like, it helps you kind of figure out what their personalities are, what their voices are. So with our fancy vampire here, who, you know, we'll call him something sort of ethereal, you know, like, I don't know, like Count Twilight, something that's sort of soft, has a little bit of drama to it. You could see a toy being called that. So he's Count Twilight. Count Twilight is a new figure who's been made sort of special to order. And perhaps his, you know, the character that he's supposed to be is this aristocrat. He's, you know, in the fiction, in the show that his character is from, he is this regal figure. He's this proud sort of a princely type. And he's realizing that he's just a toy. He's just a toy that's going to be sent off, and, you know, because he's such a fancy toy, he probably won't even be played with. He'll be put on a shelf. He'll be displayed. And perhaps that makes him feel a little bit dehumanized. He's supposed to be a lord, but he's really just a prop. It might be interesting, in fact, if the stand that he stands on is molded to his feet. He's really just a vaguely articulated statue. Now, that gives him a nice place to start. Why must I just be a prop? Why must I just be a statue? Why can't I be the person I want to be? I mean, that's a pretty good theme to start with. Why can't I be who I want to be? That's something anybody can relate to. And it's something that's easy to turn into action. Because if you're stuck being somebody you don't want to be, then immediately a motivation comes to mind. And that's that I want to escape. I want to get away from this role and be able to write my own destiny. Now, a good conflict for him is not knowing truly what he wants to be. He just knows he doesn't want to be a prop. He knows he wants to be like the regal vampire figure that he's been drawn from. So let's put his name there so that we don't forget it. He's, did I say Count Twilight? How about Lord Twilight? Oh, he's supposed to be a vampire, isn't he? Should I give him fangs? Is that too silly? Yeah, that's too silly. Let's do it anyway. Let's give him a downward fang, because that looks a little bit more dignified, I feel. Now we're going to go over to our ninja, our antagonist. So if Lord Twilight is trying to escape the North Pole, escape Santa's workshop, then I think that it would be interesting if our antagonist, the elderly ninja, was trying to stop him. The ninja never made it out. He's been in the North Pole since the 80s, and he doesn't want anyone to leave. Now, let's think about that. Doesn't want anyone to leave. That doesn't quite make sense because toys leave all the time. So what if, let's go back to Lord Twilight for a second. There's a sort of a trope in stories involving the military, and this is based on real life, where troops would want to leave the war, and so they would in some way harm themselves, damage themselves, so that they got sent home. What if Lord Twilight decides to do something similar? He has a plan that if he abrases himself in some way, then he won't get sent out. He'll be sent to sort of the damaged pile, the part of the Santa's factory where damaged toys are sent, and then he thinks from there I can escape. So I think it might be interesting if, because he doesn't want to, he's vain, Lord Twilight. He has this sense of, well, I'm superior. I shouldn't have to just be a prop. So he would give himself a bit of a vain injury. Perhaps he just gives himself a scratch, a big old scratch across his chest like this. And maybe the person who gives him this idea is our elderly ninja, who, since he's supposed to be kind of a G.I. Joe type figure, we'll call him something like, what's a good, we'll call him, oh, here we go. Lord Twilight has a name, Lord Twilight. It's an aristocratic title and an evening type name. So we'll call him something like, let's call him like something Dawn. Dawn Fist, Dawn Blade. Dawn Blade. We'll call him Dawn Blade. That sounds like the name of a toy that comes from the 80s. Dawn Blade. And then he affects a kind of avuncular, like a mentor type attitude at first when he first meets Lord Twilight. He's like, I'm Dawn Blade, but please just call me Dawn. You know, he plays up this sort of, hey, I'm just a swell guy here to help. That's his attitude. And he's got the scratch over the eye. That gives him something to mirror Lord Twilight's scratch. He tells Lord Twilight, if you don't want to get sent out, just make yourself defective. Perhaps there's a bunch of marred sort of toys that didn't come out like they're supposed to, and they're called the defectives. He's like, make yourself defective. They'll throw you in the defective pile. Perhaps it's a chute. It's a big chute in the workshop. A long metal tube with a hatch on it. They open the hatch, they put the defective toys in the chute, and they fall down into this basement of the workshop where there's just a massive cistern full of defective toys. So now they're down in the cistern. They're down in this sort of dark cave-like part of the workshop where the defective toys are sent. And it's there that Lord Twilight realizes that Dawn doesn't really want him to escape. Dawn, maybe he kind of has a little bit of a fiefdom set up down there. He's kind of the lord of the defectives. And when he sees this beautiful new toy, Lord Twilight, who's perfect and who is going to be sent out, but doesn't want to be. He doesn't want to be a toy, Lord Twilight. Dawn is like, he's offended by that. He's like, okay, you're perfect. You could go out, but you don't want to? No way. So he kind of hatches this plan to be a fake mentor figure to Lord Twilight, to say like, hey, if you want to get out of this, give yourself a scratch. You can use my sword, because his sword is like, it looks like just a plastic sword, but it turns out there's actually a metal sword inside it that Dawn has made from scraps of defective toys over the years. He's like, give yourself this scratch. They'll send you down here, and then you can escape. He tells Lord Twilight this lie about how there's a secret way out here. So obviously, Lord Twilight starts off proud, thinking he's found a way out, and then realizes he's been sold a bill of goods. He's been sold this lie, and he's told that he has no choice but to remain down here as one of Don Blade's servants. That's a great conflict, because it makes this aristocratic vampire figure who has pretenses to being better than you, being superior, and Don Blade, who has forced himself into a position of power. It's better to reign in hell than serve in heaven kind of mentality. So now we have a conflict between two guys who think themselves superior. And so Don Blade is never going to change. He has carved out a place for himself in this world. But it's not too late for Lord Twilight. Lord Twilight can learn. He can learn that he's not a superior person, that he can't cheat the system, so to speak. And that whatever, he knows he doesn't want to be a statue, but that doesn't mean he gets to be a lord. If you deny sort of the role set for you, it falls on you to create a new life for yourself. And perhaps he sort of forges an alliance with the rest of the defectives. Perhaps he meets a fellow defective, maybe a Raggedy Ann doll that's threadbare, that's stained. Perhaps he forges a friendship, a relationship with this Raggedy Ann doll, and eventually they all band together to overthrow Don Blade, to sort of band together and say, hey, we don't have to stay down here. We don't have to follow Don Blade's weird beef, his weird idea that we're not worthy. We can actually, we have value as beings, not just as toys, but as sentient beings. They overthrow Don Blade. They come up with a way to escape from the cistern, from the receptacle of the defective toys. And they throw a little revolution where they're actually able to be heard by the people who run the workshop, by the head elves, and eventually by Santa himself, to say hey, we don't belong down here. We can do good. We have a purpose. And Santa realizes, yeah, you're right. I'm sorry I just sent you down there. I wasn't thinking about what you needed. I was so caught up in trying to deliver these perfect toys to everybody, I wasn't thinking about you guys. And that's that mirrors our themes. Santa himself was stuck in this idea that you had to be perfect or you were defective. And so the story ends with these defective toys being sent out to just kids who don't care if it's perfect. They just want something cool to play with. Because you think about all these great toys you just found in a sandbox when you were a kid. You think about, these one-legged Barbie dolls and these horrible flattened army men. They were all the toys you need. Your imagination filled the rest of the void. And even though Don Blade was trying to keep them in this, in this hell of sorts, he too is given the opportunity to go out and join and to be an actual toy. He's shown that he didn't have to live this way, and he's given the opportunity to change. So that is a Just Add Water story. We've taken our protagonist, a fancy vampire with pretenses of lordship and a desire to not be a prop, which is a very relatable goal and a relatable flaw. He wants to be free, but he's also got hubris. That gives him a goal and a flaw to overcome. We've got the elderly ninja who has desires, abilities, and flaws that both bring out the worst of our protagonist, but also give him something important to overcome. And we've got the North Pole, which is kind of a wonderful, fantastical location, Santa's workshop, that kind of puts them all in a different context than they would be otherwise. Like imagine, like I'm just going to pull out another location here. Here we go. High fantasy. This is like Lord of the Rings. This is dragons and castles. Completely different story. The fancy vampire becomes, perhaps he's an actual lord. Perhaps he's a traveling dandy or something, and the elderly ninja is in charge of like a whole army of ninjas, and he's gone mad with power over the years. It becomes a totally different story. But because we pulled out the North Pole, it becomes a bit of a smaller story, but it becomes a story where the scope of it, the small scope of it, enables, I think, some more interesting themes to emerge. So that there is an example of how you can take anything. You can take just 3 things, and by thinking about what those items sort of have in them thematically and how they play off each other, you're able to see a story emerge. And if you can do that with just 3 things, you can do that with characters that are more important to you. If you think about what these characters are, if you think about the kind of dialogue they have with each other, if you think about the conversation of storytelling and what that's meant to communicate to your readers, to your audience, then you can create something special. Even if it's just a couple of toys fighting in a basement. So that's just me, and maybe something in that speaks to you. And try it. Try just picking 3 things at random, seeing what you can do with it, and that will help you practice these techniques that will enable you to make something more important to you. And who knows, maybe just the simple story you come up with from these 3 things you picked at random ends up being something you want to work on further. Anyway, thanks for spending this time with me. Thanks for letting me doodle these goofy figurines, and I hope you had fun. Have a nice one.